The Legend of Jimmy Spoon by Kristiana Gregory. 5. A New Family. An old woman held her arms out to Jimmy. She was round and short, with a striped blanket over her shoulders. She seemed to want to hold him, but he couldn't move from the saddle. Nampa spoke rapidly to her, and Jimmy could tell he was explaining about his skinned legs. Washaki plunged his lance into the ground. He lifted Jimmy from the horse and carried him into the teepee. Walking to the left, he circled the fire until he came to the north side, where he laid him on a robe. Jimmy was unaware of the honor this meant. The robe was the chief's own bed. The woman stepped in through the open flap and asked Jimmy a question. He looked at her blankly. She smiled and bent over the cooking pouch that hung from a low tripod that straddled the fire. With a shaped buffalo horn, she ladled soup into a wooden bowl, then held it to Jimmy's lips. He drank. Chunks of tender deer meat melted in his mouth. How good it tasted. Such a nice old woman, Jimmy thought. Kind, like Mother. After he had eaten, old Mother put her hand over Jimmy's heart and spoke to him tenderly, her words foreign but somehow comforting. She rubbed his sores with skunk oil and mint. Even though her touch was gentle, Jimmy winced in pain. She covered him with a soft fur and left him to rest. Alone in the huge cone-shaped tent, Jimmy counted 21 tall poles pointing upward to where they crisscrossed, forming a smoke hole. Blue sky showed through above. Jimmy looked around. 20 hides were patched together and stretched over the poles, the hem stopping a few inches above the ground. On his side of the teepee, household sacks and sleeping robes weighed down a leather lining that reached a third of the way up the side. The space between the cover and the lining was as wide as the lodge poles and acted as a chimney flute. Warm air rising through the opening bore away smoke from the cooking fire. Jimmy watched an edge of white cloud drift past the blue above. He could hear water from the stream, a dog barking in the distance, and the sounds of children. That afternoon, a girl of about 15, Clara's age, came into the lodge and sat next to old Mother. She held a papoose sleeping in a cradle board, which she propped against the pole. Jimmy learned that her name was Kanabi, and that she was the chief's wife. He watched as old Mother unrolled a hide and spread it out at her knees. Jimmy found himself staring. The fingertips of old Mother's left hand were missing. He felt sick inside. She must have had a horrible accident, he thought. Despite the swollen stumps, she worked deftly with the knife, cutting the hide, then threading a bone needle with sinew. Hanabi, too, was sewing when old Mother held up a long shirt. He knew he was to get dressed. He felt greatly relieved. He hated being naked from his waist down. His shirt hung loose, with soft fringe at his knees and sleeves. Hanabi tied a strip of leather around his waist, then opened a pair of moccasins for him to step into. He had never felt clothes so soft and warm before, but he wondered about pants. It was breezy without them. Jimmy didn't completely understand old Mother's explanation, but he figured she wanted his legs to heal before he wore pants. Old Mother led him outside. The afternoon sun was bright. Soon the children were crowding around him, staring. He looked at their faces. Everyone had brown eyes and dark hair. Some wore their hair over their shoulders. Some wore braids with greased pompadours. They were dressed in a variety of leather shirts, open vests, and long breechcloths. Jimmy tried to smile. The girls giggled behind their hands. A boy named Poog stepped forward with a stick. He had heard about Jimmy's raw legs and wanted to see for himself. Before Jimmy realized what was happening, Poog had lifted his new shirt with the stick high enough to show everyone Jimmy's naked parts. Laughter burst from the children. Jimmy was frightened. Without thinking, he kicked Poog in the leg as hard as he could. The kick landed Poog cheek down in the dirt. Suddenly, a large, screaming woman pushed her way into the ring of children. It was Poog's mother. She stuck her face right up to Jimmy's, their noses almost touching. He felt the sharp tip of her knife against his throat. His eyes went weak with fear. He wanted to cry. His mother had never raised her voice to him, yet here was a mother ready to kill him. "Icky! Icky!" said old Mother, running to his side. "Right here," she was saying to the angry woman. "He is my little son." Calmly, she walked Jimmy back to the teepee, where she gave him a patty of dried service berries. It tasted like a cookie. The next day, another boy tried to raise the dress. When Jimmy kicked him, the boy let out a scream that brought half the camp rushing for a look. Chief Washaki stood quietly by his lodge. When they noticed him watching, there was silence. After that day, the children left Jimmy's dress alone. And that is the end of chapter 5.